What's up, Dr. Chad? Dr. Caden will be jumping in here in just a minute, but I wanted to go ahead and get started and finish up the conversation from last week where we so abruptly ended the conversation. Had some patients walking in, and patient care comes first, always. And so we just cut the thing short. Here we are again. So, and we were kind of talking about category 1, 2, and 3 movements, especially in the context of CrossFit, where what we see happening is that people are having lower levels of strict strength, but still adding load and volume on top of that with some of the higher skill movements like push press and push jerk, or kipping pull-ups and butterfly pull-ups, when really their strict strength in those zones are relatively low. And part of the reason why we think of that is the programming in CrossFit is almost divided in thirds, where you may come in and do strict strength, or the programming might call for kipping, or it might call for butterfly, or it might call for a push press versus a push jerk. And sometimes even using those, to get more reps in, kind of scaling up to the higher skill version to complete more reps rather than actually working on the strict strength. And, it's probably one of the bigger reasons why we see a lot of shoulder problems coming out of the CrossFit space is strict strength is relatively low compared to the higher skill movements that are happening. And then you stack on speed and higher skill movements with low levels of strict strength onto an athlete who is already missing some joint range of motion and some mechanics elsewhere. And it's just one of those kind of recipes for an inevitable disaster. Maybe not there tomorrow, but if you do things poorly for a long enough amount of time, injury is going to stack up somewhere. That's just a matter of time. The way you move is the greatest predictor of will you get injured or not. And we just see that clinically over and over. So we love CrossFit. We think it's a great training stimulus, but we do have some peeves about it, and especially the way that maybe a lot of coaching is going down. So we just want to share these quick, easy tips on, hey, how do you quickly assess for movement? What are some simple strategies that you can deploy for your athletes to help them move better? A little bit on how we think about scaling in the shoulder. And then, hey, Caden, can you add yourself in? Or do I need to add you? There we go. Sweet. Good. So anyway, we're just trying to pass on some of these little knowledge sound bites so that you can try these things out with your athletes in real time and see if you can help them move better, create more intentional scales and progressions around certain movements, and ultimately keep your gym members healthy, safe, and paying their membership dues, because members that don't stay don't pay. All right, so that kind of wraps up the shoulder, and we're going to move on into the deadlift. So when we go out and do workshops, typically the two things that we get called upon the most is shoulder and deadlift. More people come into the clinic talking about how they hurt their back doing a deadlift or picking something up off the ground. And more people that come into the clinic have like total fear and anxiety around deadlift than any other movement there is, which is ridiculous because really the deadlift is the most simple of all the movements. It just turns out that like doing deadlift incorrectly may lead to injury much faster than any of the other movements as well. But doing it correctly really has a lot of potential to make you like so thick and robust and resilient in the hips and low back. It's almost like, hey, if you just want to be durable, you do deadlifts and do it right. And we use deadlifts a lot in the clinic to help people get out of pain and prevent it from coming back, because deadlifting well is the most transferable skill to real life that maybe there is. Would you agree to that? Okay.
Yeah. And like, it's funny, like with the deadlift, we've all got, especially like within this space, we've got our own ideas around what proper technique should look like when it comes to not only picking up really heavy weights, but relatively light weights as well. There's a lot of talk in the fitness space now around it being okay for you to round your spine when you pick stuff up, which can be a little misleading for people who have no experience with training. There's a lot of people out there who have practice, like with the Jefferson curl, for instance, they've practiced very light loads, like incrementally extending the spine from a low position and then adding some weight to that. And I feel like some people may see that and be like, oh, that's something that I can do too. That's kind of, we got to put some context around that. And hopefully when we talk about the deadlift, we can kind of touch on both of those aspects as we go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the big thing to understand around that is the Jefferson curl is more about restoring mobility. And what we have learned over the past several years is that restoring mobility requires load. It's not just like stretching, it's not flexibility. When you add load into a position, it actually helps you increase the position. And so, like the Jefferson curl kind of is out there on its own little planet, and there's a place for it. We think the place is restoring mobility. I don't think we're going to see anybody doing, you know, 3 sets of 10 deadlift with 315 pounds, Jefferson curl style. You know what I mean? The body won't tolerate it, and that's the truth. And you can run a simple test on yourself. Load the bar with 6 times more weight that you could even think about lifting. Put it on your back and try to flex or extend your spine, and your body will not let you do that. Your body's pretty intuitive that way. But when you hit like physical blocks inside of motion that force you out of a good position, the body can't really tolerate that in the same ways. And so the conversation around hinging is it should be a hinge at the hip and not a flex through the spine. And this dials back to our concepts of neutral spine and where we really want to be. But then the side conversation that you bring up is it's okay to lift with the spine flexed, or it's okay to lift with the spine extended. Thinking about like the boulder pickup or the keg pickup, it's going to force you into these flex positions. But what happens is you lift in that position and you stay there. The problem with flexing or extending is when you flex or extend under load, as like you're changing position under load. That's what's really hard on the spine. It's not the flexed position or the extended position. It's that you started in one position and then while you were under load, moved into another one. And that's what becomes really stressful for the body. And so like what we see in the clinic is not people lifting with rounded spines, because most people are aware of that and they don't do it. What we're seeing though is people getting to the bar round and then pulling themselves flat, using the load to get them there. And the way that that sequences their body into the position is just like moving, changing positions under load, right? In the spine. Like we're not talking about like your body moving from one position to another under load. We're talking about segmentally changing position in the spine with load on your body, which could be a back squat, a front squat, a deadlift. And so, but for most people, like that's a high level conversation that I don't think we need to be having. If we can just get people to understand like what's a good spine position and how do you stay there, we can solve the higher level things later. Like most gyms are not programming keg lifts into their programming, you know what I mean? And I mean, just teaching people the basics is really has the most impact for most gyms, I would say, because most gyms are full of, you know, regular old Joes. Not CrossFit athletes, just people trying to get their sweat on, get a little stronger, do a little movement during the day, suffer more than they probably should. And so really what we want to hone in on is like the setup on the bar. And if you can like teach an athlete how to get to the bar correctly, or at least intentionally, then you can start to unravel the fear and anxiety around lifting the bar off the ground. And not only is this true in the deadlift, but also the clean and the snatch. Anytime you're pulling a bar off from the ground, these positions become really important. And so we'll flip the camera around here in a minute, but we'll try and walk through a little bit of the anatomy behind the deadlift and how the spine is functioning and how sequencing the muscles in there change the mechanics of the spine during loaded movement. And then we'll see it in real time once we flip the mobility camera around. But we did a workshop, it's been a while back now, but the slogan was syntax matters, right? And syntax in the language space is simply the sequence of which you put words together, right? And so an easy example of that was Caden crushed that deadlift, or that deadlift crushed Caden. It's the same words, just reordered, but it changes the result. One we're loading Caden up into the back of an ambulance and we're headed off to the hospital. The other one we're writing his PR on the board. And so the way, like, movement syntax also matters. The way you sequence your body into a movement will ultimately decide how your body responds to that movement, and if you do the movement really well or not so well. And it will also determine, if you do that movement enough times, will it lead to injury or will it lead to more strength and more power and longevity of the movement. And so that's really where we want to get. It's like understanding how to set your spine first, understanding how to hinge at the hips, how to add in the knees and the ankles after that if the goal is squat. But really, if you can't just hinge and maintain good position, there's no way we can add in 3 other joints and expect for you to maintain that, right? It's easier to manage 2 joints than it is to manage 15 joints, right? And your body trying to manage your 2 hip joints plus all 5 of your lumbar spine joints plus your knees plus your ankles. So that's another 4 joints. What is that? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to 12 joints. That's a lot of joints for your body to manage. Way better to just manage 2 of them, right? So if we can get you to hinge really well, then we can start to layer in the complexity of adding in other joints that should be working in unison with the hips to create different movements called squatting. But if you can get really proficient at hinging, then one, you can add a lot of strength and a lot of durability and a lot of resilience into the hips and low back. Even if you're coming off of a low back injury, that's where you want to be. Avoiding those things is the worst thing you can do, because then you're going to be in the perpetual cycle of weakening and getting weaker. And really, if you want to be resilient, you have to be strong, and you have to be stronger than anything your life is going to have you do. Right? Part of your life is picking up, an 80-pound bundle of shingles. Okay, well, you need to be able to lift 180 pounds multiple times with great technique, because that weight supersedes any weight you're going to pick up during the day. And you need to be able to lift more weight than you would pick up during the day and more times than you would ever pick something up during the day. If you pick up an 80-pound bag of shingles 50 times a day, you need to lift a 100-pound bar, a 160-pound bar 100 times. You know what I mean? You have to be stronger and more volume than what you're going to experience in your daily life. And that's just kind of a way we conceptualize how much strength should somebody have. All right. As we know, if you pick up an 80-pound bag of shingles, bundle of shingles, 50 times a day, if we can get you to systematically and repeatedly lift 160 pounds 100 times, the chances that you get hurt lifting 80 pounds are incredibly small if you do it with great technique. Certainly, you could lift 160 pounds with great technique and 80 pounds with terrible technique and still hurt yourself. But it's irrational to think that somebody would do that. Why spend the time learning to lift heavier weights really well just to turn around and lift light weights really poorly? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyway, Caden, in the gym, as a coach, in the CrossFit setting, the bars are being pulled off the ground a lot. Probably multiple times a week, or maybe even in every workout, depending on the training cycle you're currently in. As a coach, like, what are some of the things that you notice in athletes when they're approaching the bar? What are some cues you're currently giving to help people? And maybe let's just start with, like, as a percentage of athletes, how many do you see getting to the bar in the way that we're teaching people to get there?
It's a pretty low percentage of people. Most of the time, and especially in a CrossFit class, when people are tired while they're doing deadlifting, most of the time you see deadlifts are going to be in a workout. Probably very rarely are you doing it just for the sake of doing it. But when fatigue is set in, I mean, they don't really care how they approach. What they're thinking is, how quickly can I get down here and just start ripping and gripping so I can do all my reps? But the way that we teach it, I think takes a little bit of thought and a lot of practice and a lot of bad habit breaking.
Yeah, and that's, deconstructing movement is maybe harder than constructing the new movement patterns. Most people learn this stuff really easily. And honestly, like when we teach the deadlift, people pick up on the low back positions really fast. It's the interesting thing is the head position people really struggle with because habitually and repetitively people have been coached eyes up, chest up, head up, and that's the worst cue, but that's been like hammered. I mean, if you were a high school athlete, that's all you got. Hey, head up, chest up, eyes up. Okay, your body follows where your eyes are going. Okay, yeah, whatever. I want my head to follow where my body's going, not the opposite way around. You got to remember, guys, your neck is still a part of your spine. And when our goal is to put our spine in a fixed position and leave it there while we do movement, hinging over at the hip and looking up with the neck is still a break in neutral spine. And that's where we see a lot of force bleeds through the upper body and where we get into some weird upper body pains with the deadlifting, which is, I would say a dominant lower body lift because people's head positions are so poor. But when the head breaks position, the shoulders round, the arms go into a bad position, you just get a lot of force bleeds that add stress into the low back. And so breaking the head position has been the most challenging, not only for us clinically, but for the patients and the athletes. It's like, hey, look, you can't do that. A telltale sign. I feel like if you're a coach and you want to know, hey, is that person's head in a good position? If they've got a crease in their neck, their head is not in a good position. The neck should be long and flat. And the head up, eyes up, chest up thing, it doesn't fly. Okay. You've got to maintain good position in the spine. And the only time that applies is really in Olympic lifts where the torso angle should be 35 degrees. Okay. And the head is still in line with the torso, but the torso angle is just really high. In CrossFit, something we get that is quite a bit different. So like they're adding in Olympic lifts, pulling the bar off the ground. But technically those lifts are designed to be done once. And so you see the best athletes in the world do a snatch, but they're getting under the bar one time. And even in their training cycles, they're rarely going over 5 reps. And when they do, they're resetting the initial position before they take the second, third, fourth, and fifth rep. Most Olympic level athletes aren't doing a lot of recycling the bar. And then you get into workouts like CrossFit, where you got 15 snatch, followed by what, a 400-meter sprint? Which one is that?
I think the Nancy, maybe. I think.
Of course, it would be Nancy. But what we see is lifts that should be taken with a really high torso angle. In CrossFit, we see the deadlift style. So they're recycling through positions in a terrible position already. And if you can't maintain a good spine position there, what ends up happening is you're recycling reps from the bent position over and over and over. And this really can lead to a lot of low back strain, overstress. We see what's called the oysters of the low back, where the low back muscles are like hyper developed, and really they shouldn't be. The hips should be hyper developed, not the low back muscles. The low back muscles are designed to be just like long, flat straps that hold position. They're not really designed to flex and extend. Certainly they can do that. But just like the abs aren't really designed to be a prime mover. They're meant to just hold position. The back is the same. Those are opposing sides. And so being able to figure out torso position, how your head should follow that, we think is really critical, especially when we're dealing with low back pain. And that's what you're going to have most of the time when people are complaining about the deadlift is low back pain. But sometimes the head position is what leads to the low back pain because it slacks the whole system out. Or it could be asymmetries in the ankles or the hips, where when they load the asymmetry, it forces like a pelvic tweak. And that's what most people get in a deadlift injury. They don't blow a disc doing the deadlift. They actually tweak their pelvis and they get the big pop and they freak out and they think, oh my God, I blew a disc. What should I do? And they get an MRI and an injection and don't solve the problem. And then they quit deadlifting. Welcome to healthcare. So our goal is simply to, how do you identify what is good and what is bad when we're thinking about how to get to the bar? And maybe we shouldn't even say good or bad. Maybe we should just say optimum and less optimum.
Yeah.
Uh,
Better and less better.
Yeah, better and less better. But the goal is, hey, we need some movement targets and some standards that we're after here. As long as the standard is pick the bar up and put it down, okay, nobody's ever going to get better at doing it. But when the standard becomes, here's how you get to the bar. If you can't get there like that, how can we improve to do it? And then once you can do it, how do we do it over and over and over again until it becomes the new normal? Uh, so,
and I think the important thing about standards too, like CrossFit coaches always, look at standards from a competition perspective, like, oh, we need to have a certain standard so that we can hold everybody accountable and stuff. But you need to have baseline movement standards in classes anyway, because it's really hard to understand if you're seeing somebody move poorly. Like, hey, is that because they don't know how to move very well, or is it because they're doing too many reps, or is it because they're going too fast, or is it because the weight is too high? Like, there's so many other variables that can play into the standard not being met. So you have to have some sort of guiding principle around, hey, like, are they approaching the bar the same way? Are they keeping the spine flat all the way through? If yes, with the PVC warm up, with empty barbell warm up, whether it's the deadlift or a snatch or clean, you still have to hinge to pick up the bar, whether it's a snatch or a clean or a deadlift. It's all the same. If it looks good in the warm up, that's where you need to be paying attention as a coach. And then it starts to break down as they approach whatever weight they assume they can do for the workout. It really is your job to go and say, hey, I know you think you can do this, but like you're really breaking down. I need you to strip it. Like, we need to go down in weight. We probably need to go down in reps, and I need you to slow down a little bit, pay attention to what you're doing, because a lot of the bad rap that CrossFit gets is simply from a technique standpoint. Coaches are getting lazy and not paying attention to the technique aspect, and they're sacrificing technique for the sake of intensity in the workouts. So that's kind of, like, at least from my perspective, that's what I'm hoping we can try to address and change, and get coaches to be comfortable saying, hey, this is what I want your movements to look like. If they don't look like this, we're going to make some adjustments so that you can finish the workout and get the most out of it.
Yeah, and it's a great point about the standards. And just to be clear, when we say standards, we don't think like your CrossFit competition standards need to be in your gym. When we're talking about standards, we're talking about positional standards, right? So somebody who's missing half of their ankle dorsiflexion and 75% of their hip external rotation is not going to go below parallel in the squat without significant compensations in the spine. They're just not going to do it. Their body will not allow it, no matter how much you think that standard should be there. If your only standard is acid to grass, then you're going to rack up a lot of injuries and low back problems in your athletes, because what we have to have is standards of movement and understanding where the breakdown occurs. Because yeah, you might need to scale for weight, or you might need to scale for reps, but sometimes you need to scale for position. And what that means is maybe you don't strip the weight off the bar for a deadlift or a clean, but maybe their breakdown is in the last 4 inches, like the first 4 inches off the ground and the last 4 inches back down to the ground. And what they need to do is pull off a 4-inch block. Okay, because somebody might have the strength to lift the weight and do it correctly, but they don't have the mobility to do it from the original position. Right. So like if you are taking cleans from the ground and you can't get there without your low back rounding, okay, just put it up on blocks and pull from there until you can work your way back down to that position. But you need to have a system and a process for how to get down there, because we also don't think you should just pull from blocks for forever. And that's the goal around these movements. It's not give your athletes something else to do so they don't hurt themselves. It's give them something to do so they don't hurt themselves, but also give them the things to do so that they can improve on the thing that you took them away from. It's never just a remove. It's a remove and replace, but then we got to figure out how to get back to the baseline movement. Okay, the original standards are you should pull deadlifts and cleans and snatch from the ground. Okay, if you can't do that, what can we do to get you pulling through the best positions you have available to maintain your strength and conditioning levels? But what mobility hacks can we give you to get you closer back to the standard of movement, which is pulling those different lifts from the ground? And so understanding where the breakdown happens is just as important as recognizing the breakdown, because understanding where the breakdown occurs is what is going to dictate how you scale the movement and then how you progress back to the original movement. And so we'll set up the mobility cam real quick. We're not going to dive too far out into the weeds of like anatomy and positioning. We're just going to show you what we commonly see, why it's problematic in the spine for low back pain, some of the things we see coming out of it as a result, and then over the next couple of weeks we'll chat through, like, okay, how do you assess these things outside of visual? Like, okay, somebody sets up in a way that's less desirable. What are the things we should be looking for to help them get there in the way we think they should? And then the mobility hacks that will help them get there. And remember, our goal is to help you pick up on these things really quick, understand where the breakdown is, understand exactly what mobility hacks to give people, and then test, retest. What did the movement look like? We did some work. Now what does it look like? Is it better? Yes or no? And so that's always where we're going to head with these things. So we'll get the camera going. We'll set a barbell up. We've already got one loaded over there. And we'll kind of walk through these bar positions we're looking to get. All right. I'm not usually up here in jeans and work boots, but as it turns out, I twisted my ankle yesterday. This is the best we're doing today. But check this out. Do I need to angle different? Hold on. It's okay. We'll need to get the side view of the spine, so kind of see what's going on there. Quit echoing. Good. Yeah. All right. So you want me to turn this sideways? Yeah. Turn side. Bingo. Say what? Oh, really? All right. So here's the scoop. This is what we see happening over and over and over. We say, hey, look, pick this thing up off the ground, and we just want to observe your strategy of how to get there. And most people do it the same way, whether they're coming into the gym or whether they're coming out of the gym, or just somebody who hadn't been in the gym in years and they're going to pick something up. We just see the same things happening. And what we typically see is rounding down to the spine. So you can see everything's round here. And then people pulling themselves flat before. Okay, so what happens there is everything is on slack, on slack, on slack. But then to pull the back flat from here, you actually have to turn on the hip flexor muscles so high to flatten that thing out that it overloads the hip flexor first. And whatever muscle gets loaded first in a movement is going to be the first one to fatigue out and create problems in the movement, right? So when you deadlift, the first things you want on are your hips and your hamstrings. And what that looks like is loading back into the hips and the hamstrings with everything tight and engaged through the core, not round and slacked out. We think you should have enough hamstring mobility to hinge forwards without changing spine position and grab the bar. And then you can adjust your position for whatever you want. Deadlift, you can stay more horizontal. Cleans and snatch, you may want to increase the torso angle a bit. But if you can not get that far down, then you're simply going to bend the knees to get to the bar. I can't even demonstrate it because of my ankle. But you get the idea. So what we're seeing is the same things that play out if somebody were to lift with a round spine, playing out as a result of starting round and pulling flat before they lift. And then what we get is a lot of spine extension problems. And then some other like things that I've seen in the past have been anterior hip. Like the front of the hip is loaded so much when people get to the top, they can't actually get the hips through into a clean position. So they end up arching their back a lot, and it actually starts to really rack up on the hip flexor right as it crosses the hip. It becomes very problematic. So if you got anterior hip pain, people talking about that with deadlift, sign of a poor deadlift setup. Low back pain with deadlifting, poor deadlift setup. And then also we got to dig out into the weeds of ankle symmetries, knee symmetries, and hip symmetries, particularly in rotations and extension, to figure out really, hey, is this person's deadlift problem a result of something else? But for now, we're going to stick with like, hey, can we get into neutral spine? And if we can't, how do we get there? Can we get to the bar in neutral? And if we can't, how do we get there? So next week, we'll be back talking about how do you recognize where the breakdown is and what mobility hacks you can put into play to help your athletes get to the bar with more intention in better positions before they ever lift it. All right, so we'll drop back to the computer, wrap this thing up, and then we'll start planning for next week. All right. Good. Yeah. So, when we're looking at deadlift, we think it's the most transferable skill. So, I mean, if you've ever helped somebody move, I've moved like 50 times and helped other people move less than even I've moved. And it's still terrible. But when you think about like lifting the couch, lifting the refrigerator, lifting all the boxes that have, a lifetime's worth of crap in, even though somebody's only lived there for 3 years. The position is quite a bit different from what we see in the traditional deadlift. Okay? So this is one of our first scales we will make for people. Some of our first scales are, hey, go straight. Cut the speed out and just work on technique through the slower positions. But in the deadlift, we actually move people away from the conventional deadlift towards the, more like a frog stance deadlift where the feet are wider and the hands are on the inside. We're not going like full sumo. We're not going really wide stance, feet flared way out and the hands right in the middle. We're somewhere in between there. But what we found is that it gives people more access to hip positions. It allows them to get to the bar with a better spine position. And for the purpose of strengthening that movement, it is much more transferable. Like you're never going to lift a couch with your feet in narrow and your hands on the outside. You're going to go feet wide and hands in the middle. Same thing with the fridge, and same thing with all the boxes you're picking up off the ground. Same thing with a bag of mulch or a bundle of shingles or anything you're going to pick up outside. You're going to go feet wide, hands more towards the center. And so that's one of our initial hacks we do to help people start deadlifting. And the key to helping people start deadlifting if they've been injured is doing it with such a high level of technique that makes it almost impossible for them to get hurt, and doing that enough times that rebuilds their confidence that they can do it without getting hurt. The worst thing you can do while you're lifting is lift with fear, because you're going to do something stupid and you're going to get hurt. But it's not because you are weak or because you're not resilient or your body's falling apart. Fear just makes you do things in ways that you shouldn't be doing it. You got to go in with full confidence. You got to know, hey, this is right. I can do it correctly, and I can add weight to my tolerance and be totally fine. So those are some kind of glimpses into the future of like, okay, when we're looking at the deadlift, how to rescale. And that's one way with it, rescale for position. And the other scales, I mean, the deadlift is not super scalable. Right? Sure, you could go back to like a kettlebell swing or just reduce the weight down so far, but almost always scaling for position is what's going to help people the most in the deadlift or the clean or the snatch, going off the ground. So next week we'll talk about identifying Anytime you're pulling off the ground, what is somebody's limiting factor or factors to getting to the bar in neutral spine? Sometimes it's just the case that they don't know what that is. Teach them neutral spine, and they take it and run with it, and everything's fine. But a lot of times what we're running into is hip asymmetries, ankle problems, stiffness through the posterior chain, like hamstrings, really limiting people from getting down. And so how to recognize that and how to implement these short doses of how do we improve this stuff really fast to get people on the bar in the class doing what they're supposed to be doing. Any final remarks from the other side of the room?
Nope. I think I like where the conversation's headed. Super important. I think there's a lot of, I've heard it said before, like some people just won't teach the deadlift in certain classes because they say it's a very high risk to reward ratio. It's like the rewards aren't as high as the risks, but then they're also programming power cleans for people. And essentially the first pull in a power clean is the deadlift. So it shows up whether you like it or not.
Dive into the.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that, and I think maybe even try to show, like, hey, this is what we would like to see out of the deadlift, but also like when you do these other movements, how remarkably similar that start position is. You know, you're taking a deadlift, which is a very like category 1 type movement, but then you turn it into a clean or a snatch, and you're changing your shapes and all that kind of stuff. But the start position is always the same. So if you're not teaching deadlifts, but you're teaching people to clean, then you need to start teaching deadlifts. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and it's, it kind of doubles back on the building blocks. Deadlift is a building block of pulling anything off the ground. And so probably a mistake to teach people how to clean without building up the foundational strength and movement efficiency components of the deadlift. And so, everybody's got their camp. And, everybody wants to say, this is right and this is wrong. And if you're doing this, then you're stupid, or the risk to reward is ridiculous and you shouldn't be doing it. But the truth is, like, we're coming from a position of people come in here and they've blown up their backs and they can deadlift and they can do it pain-free. And it doesn't mean they have to deadlift world records. But the reality is, just because you don't program deadlifts because you think the risk to reward is low, doesn't mean people aren't going to pick stuff up off the ground when they're at home or not working out. And that's where skill transfer and relatability comes in. Nobody is doing anything remotely similar to the clean at home. It doesn't happen. Okay. I guess if you're like trying to get the couch upstairs and you got to clean it up over your head. I don't know. You know what I mean? Clean the couch up here, jerk it overhead so you can get it up that staircase. It's like a tight 90. I don't know. Pivot. Well, friends reference. But yeah, there's so many movements that people are teaching that replace the deadlift, but they're really not transferable, and it really doesn't help anybody avoid anything. Like doing a deadlift incorrectly is only more problematic because most of the time people are adding way too much weight to the bar on top of their movement problem. Cleans, you can get injured far worse at a far lower weight because it's such a highly technical, skill-based movement. Doing cleans poorly is way worse than doing deadlifts poorly. But at the end of the day, you're moving poorly and you're not creating solutions around moving better or creating better technique in movement. So, whatever camp you're in, we're just coming from a position of we're doing it in the clinic all the time, and we help people resolve and prevent low back pain with the deadlift. If you don't like it, don't use it. If you want to do something else, whatever. But the point is, you got to be able to identify when people aren't moving correctly and give them a solution to help them move correctly so they don't get hurt. And that's probably a good place to stop. And we'll be back next on Wednesday around 2 p.m. To get into the nitty-gritty of identifying and resolving mobility issues around the deadlift.